Hey everybody, it's Jason from the Texas Gun Vault, and once again I'm coming to you with another range report. Well, and a product review, because this is another dedicated suppressor video. And the suppressor that we will be using and talking about today is the OSS HX-QD Magnum Ti. Now, this is made by a company called OSS, or Operators Suppressor Systems, which is now called Huxwrx. And the helix of the name means this uses their flow-through technology, so the core of this suppressor is kind of spiraled. It doesn't use a traditional baffle system, and that allows most of the gas to come out the front of the suppressor instead of coming back into your firearm. The QD means we do have a QD attachment point, and we are going to be using the Huxwrx or OSS muzzle brakes on the host firearms I will be shooting in this video. It is called the Magnum because this is designed for Magnum rifle calibers such as 300 Winchester Magnum and 338 Lapua. However, in this video, we're not going to be shooting those calibers through it, but because this is rated for such a powerful caliber, you can shoot a lot of other things through it that are smaller and not as powerful. And in this video, we will be shooting 300 Blackout and 5.56. And the Ti means this is made of titanium, and honestly that is my favorite material when it comes to a civilian suppressor. But now I have to give a couple of caveats before we talk about this suppressor, give you some close-ups, and of course take it to the range and see how it performs. The first thing is, my suppressor reviews are a little bit different than many other channels. For a lot of people, when it comes to reviewing suppressors, all they care about is decibel reduction. Now, I don't have the equipment to actually measure that, but I can tell you that there are other things that I think are more important to civilian shooters. If all you care about is how quiet it is, well, you might be disappointed in other aspects of its performance, such as tone. I personally think the tone of a suppressor is more important than decibel reduction, as long as it is hearing safe. A suppressor with a lower tone is going to sound more pleasant to your ears. One with a higher pitch could still ring your ears even though it is hearing safe. Obviously, because this is a flow-through can or low resistance can, I do want to test, does it actually work? Does it reduce the amount of gas that comes back into your face when you're shooting a modern sporting rifle? I also want to test things out like, is this going to change the ballistics or the velocity of the projectiles that you're going to be using? Sometimes suppressors do, sometimes they don't. And of course, I want to test its heat retention. How hot does this get? And does it dissipate the heat well? So those are the things we will be testing. The other very small caveat I do want to mention, because I want to save your time in the comment section, one of the host weapons I'm going to be using in this review is my personal Seekins SBR chambered in 300 Blackout. Now, this is a firearm that I built quite a long time ago, and right now I'm having a little bit of issue with it, especially when it comes to the trigger. I have a Fostech Echo trigger in it, so in this review you might see me having to take it off of safe as this selector lever moves when I fire it. That has nothing to do with the suppressor, and it will not affect the way that the suppressor functions at all. So you just have to ignore some of the issues I'm going to have with this, as well as this gun does not perform that great when it comes to subsonic 300 Blackout. But as I said, we're here to review the suppressor and not the gun. So that's all the caveats. So let me go ahead and adjust the camera. Let's get some close-ups of this, talk about its specs, and then we're going to take it to the range and see how it performs on two different weapons. So let's get some close-ups of this OSS HX-QD Magnum Ti suppressor. Its overall length is 8.73 inches, so it's a little bit longer than many other rifle suppressors, but that's because it's rated for calibers like 338 Lapua, and you want as much volume in there as possible. The length of this suppressor is probably going to give us a very nice tone and a lot of decibel reduction. Its diameter is 1.6 inches, and its overall weight is 18.3 ounces. It's made of titanium, which is my favorite material for a civilian suppressor because while it's not the most durable material like stellite or inconel, it still is pretty darn resistant to corrosion, but it's very, very light. I prefer it over stainless steel. This suppressor is full auto rated, and unlike some of the other OSS suppressors I have reviewed, this one is not user serviceable. But now we're going to talk about the QD system. As you can see, we have a big opening on one end, and that's because it will go over one of the OSS muzzle devices. And on the host weapons I will be using today, I did install the OSS 30 caliber muzzle brake, and on my NS15 AR-15, I did install the 5.56 one as well, and both of those will work with this suppressor. This suppressor, being rated for such powerful calibers, allows you to use lighter calibers and smaller calibers just as well. So it's a very versatile suppressor. So if you're looking for a dual suppressor for many of your rifles, this might be the way to go, because you can suppress 5.56, you can suppress 300 Blackout, and of course go up to those really powerful calibers as well. Now in this review, because I don't personally own anything in 338 Lapua, I did want to test it out as a multi-caliber suppressor. So I am going to shoot 300 Blackout through it as well as 5.56. So those are the host weapons and calibers. So that's what this suppressor is all about. So now let's get this to the range. And for our first test, I want to see what this suppressor sounds like. Now my camera might not be able to pick up the tone completely, so you'll have to just trust my judgment on this. But I am going to start off with all these tests with 300 Blackout. We're going to start with this gun unsuppressed to kind of give us a baseline. Then I will shoot 300 Blackout supersonic through the suppressor, and then 300 Blackout subsonic. And I'll tell you what I discover and experience. Now, once again, remember, this is not the best host weapon right now because I do have some problems with the trigger, and this gun does not always like to cycle 300 Blackout subsonic. But that has nothing to do with the suppressor and how it functions. So let's go to the range and see what the suppressor sounds like. So before we talk about the results and my first impressions with this very nice suppressor, I always want to thank a couple people that make these videos possible. First and foremost is a fan of the channel. He's a local subscriber. His name is Jack, and I want to thank him for lending this to me to review and also for his time in helping fill out the paperwork so I could borrow it. It means a lot to me. I also want to thank my primary sponsor who provides the ammunition for these range reports, because I do go to the range and review a lot of guns. He makes it possible. His name is Mark, and he owns an amazing grip company called Huxwrx. I'm always talking about his craftsmanship and all of these range reports. He makes custom grips for guns like 1911s, Browning High Powers, CZ75s, just to name a few. Anything you could want, he can make. He creates his own laminate woods. He can put on custom logos and engravings, finish these in a wide variety of colors. Pretty much anything you can imagine, he can make. So I'm going to put a link to his website in the comment section below, as well as a coupon code for 10% off your first order. Go over there, see everything he has to offer, and when you place your order for your set of custom grips, please thank him for supporting the Texas Gun Vault, and please tell him that I sent you his way. So now let's talk about this suppressor and how it performed. And as you saw, this gun was pretty darn loud as a baseline unsuppressed. In fact, we're using a muzzle brake, and I honestly hate muzzle brakes. I prefer flash hiders. But when it comes to suppressors, using a muzzle brake is a better option because it kind of acts as a preliminary blast baffle, and it prevents a lot of the unspent powder from getting into the suppressor and eroding it away. Now, when it comes to the supersonic loadings of 300 Blackout, I was very impressed with its tone. This is definitely a hearing safe suppressor, and the tone is very low. And I was expecting that because the suppressor's volume is so large. Now, when it comes to the subsonic loadings, I was actually impressed this gun was able to cycle them. And I think that's because although this is a flow-through can, it has just enough resistance to help cycle the action. So I was very pleasantly surprised by that, but I still think it's short stroking just a little bit. So as compared to some of the other OSS cans I have reviewed, it has a little bit more back pressure, but not by much. And for being such a long and big suppressor, it is not very heavy, and it does not affect the balance of this gun very much at all. So speaking of the flow-through technology of the suppressor, the next thing I want to go to the range and test to see how much gas comes back in my face. So I'm going to shoot this relatively fast, put a bunch of rounds through it, and I'll just let you know. Often when it comes to a direct impingement gun like this and you're running a suppressor, your eyes can begin to water. You smell the unburnt powder. It can be a little bit uncomfortable. But the whole idea of these flow-through cans is to reduce that. So let's go back to the range, put a magazine through this as fast as possible, and see what type of gas we get coming through the action of the gun. And when I first started reviewing these Helix cans by OSS and Huxwrx, I was a little bit skeptical. I was thinking to myself, it doesn't use a standard baffle design. How in the world is this even going to work? It must just be a fad. But I can tell you, they work great. When I'm behind the trigger of one of these guns, I get such little gas back in my face. My eyes don't water, they don't burn. It is quite impressive. It is very revolutionary. So I will tell you, if you are skeptical of these flow-through cans, well, don't be. They actually work. I'm very, very impressed with them. And I know some people are going to ask, what type of charging handle am I using on these host weapons? I always use mil-spec or standard charging handles, not the PRI gas buster ones, because I want to make sure that if this can does have blowback into the action of the gun, I will feel it. But in this case, I'm not at all. All right, so the next test I want to do is go back to the range and see if this suppressor changes the accuracy of this gun at all. I'm only going to test this gun at 25 yards because this is a 300 Blackout SBR. It's mainly designed for CQB, but if I do get a little bit of deviation, you can assume that that is going to be exacerbated at further distances. So let's go back to the range. I'm just going to use supersonic ammunition here. We're going to see if the point of impact changes at all when it goes between suppressed and unsuppressed. So let's go back and test that now. And unlike many of the traditionally baffled suppressors that I have shot and reviewed, when it comes to these suppressors with the flow-through technology, I often don't get much, if any, point of impact shift. And that's what I got here. I had pretty much the same group size. Suppressed it was just a little bit lower, but the difference is negligible, especially if you're going to use a gun like this for CQB. So you don't have to adjust your red dot optic, and you can shoot this gun suppressed and unsuppressed and barely see any difference whatsoever. So speaking of other things that can be changed by the suppressor, I want to go back to the range, get out the Garmin Zero chronograph, and I want to test this gun out with super and subsonic ammunition and see if this suppressor changes the velocities at all. So we will shoot this suppressed and unsuppressed with both types of ammunition to see if the ballistics are altered in any way.
$19.57. $19.51. $19.30. $19.36. $19.08. 1873, 1923, 1893, 1922, 1921. Nineteen 1931, 1947, 1959, 1926, 1905, 1931, 1882, 1955, 1945. $9.53. $9.62. $9.05. $9.11. $9.25. $9.44. $9.10. $9.11. $9.69. $9.34. $10.07. $9.13. $9.12. $9.18. $9.23. $9.66. $9.62. $9.12. $9.21. $9.48.
And as you can see from the data that we collected, when this gun is suppressed, the velocities are just a little bit faster, but the differences are negligible. One of the advantages to these suppressors with the flow-through technology is that it doesn't change the shooting experience much, the ballistics, or the velocity. Unlike other baffled suppressors that I have shot and reviewed, I do get a little bit more deviation. These, I simply don't. All right, so the next test I want to do on the 300 Blackout SBR is see how hot I can get this can. We're going to use this Fostech Echo Trigger in binary mode, and hopefully it will work. I want to get the suppressor as hot as I can, test it immediately with the laser thermometer, and then I'm going to wait 5 minutes and see how much of that heat has dissipated. With the other Helix cans I have reviewed, they retain the heat for a longer period of time. And I think it has to do with the design of the core. But this suppressor is made of titanium. And in my personal experience, I have found titanium dissipates heat quicker. So hopefully after 5 minutes, this would not be scalding hot to touch. But we have to test this out. So let's go back to the range, see how hot I can get this suppressor, and see how hot it is after 5 minutes. And I have to say that I'm quite impressed. I've done a lot of shooting so far with this 300 Blackout SBR, and this suppressor is not getting very hot at all. When it comes to other calibers like 5.56 or other OSS cans I've reviewed, these can get kind of hot, 400, 500, or even 600 degrees in some conditions. But here, we're around 300 or less. And then after 5 minutes, we are already at a pretty cool suppressor, so it would be safe to touch at about 160 degrees. It wouldn't be comfortable, but you're not going to burn yourself. And I do like how fast this can is dissipating that heat. Now, earlier in this review, I talked about how this can be a multi-caliber suppressor. You can buy this suppressor and use it on a number of guns. So now I want to do all of these tests again, but now on a 16-inch AR-15. This is my North Star Arms NS-15. It's pretty much a mil-spec style gun. So we're going to transfer this 30 caliber suppressor to this 5.56 rifle, take it back to the range, do all of the same tests, and see if it performs any differently. So let's go back to the range and see what the tone of this suppressor is like with 5.56. So when it comes to the performance of this suppressor on this 5.56 rifle, I have to say I'm impressed. Often when it comes to a 30 caliber suppressor being used on a 5.56, it might not be hearing safe. This one definitely is, but most likely it is because of the length of the suppressor and its volume. We are getting a higher pitch out of this suppressor. I would kind of put it more in the mid-range versus the low range like we got with 300 Blackout. And a lot of that has to do with how much gas can come out of the end cap, because a 22 caliber projectile is not going to fill the gap up of the 30 caliber aperture at the end. So you're just not going to get the same amount of suppression. But overall, I am pretty darn impressed with it. It's definitely quieter than what I was expecting. So now the next test we're going to do is the gas test. Now we are going to get a lot of gas coming out of the front of the suppressor because once again that projectile is so small, but I just want to make sure that if you are using this suppressor with a mil-spec charging handle that the flow through technology is still working with this caliber. So hopefully I won't get a lot of gas back in my face, I won't tear up, and I won't smell it. So let's go back to the range, put quite a few rounds through this, and see what happens. And to my surprise, I'm actually getting more gas back in my face than what I was expecting. This suppressor does seem to have a little bit more resistance than some of the other Huxwrx and OSS cans I have reviewed, and that could be because of the length and the design of that core, but because it's longer, it has more space in there to slow that gas down and come back into the gun. But it's still definitely a lot lower than many other suppressors I have shot. It's nowhere near what a traditionally baffled suppressor would be like. So the flow through technology is still working. All right, so the next test I want to do is the accuracy test. I want to see if this suppressor is going to change the point of impact at all in 5.56. So let's go back to the range and test that. And this suppressor is running very consistently. Pretty much I'm getting the same results that I did when it came to 300 Blackout. The group size is about the same, but when I suppress this rifle, it's a little bit lower. At these ranges, the change is pretty much negligible, but I could see at maybe 100, 200, or 300 yards, that drop would be enough that you would need to adjust your red dot or scope depending on what you are running. But if you're going to run this in competition in CQB style shooting, you're not going to see any point of impact shift at all. That would really affect anything. All right, so now let's get that chronograph back out and see if the suppressor changes the ballistics of 5.56 at all.
30.05. 29.41. 29.72. 29.89. 29.92. 29.38. 2938, 2938, 3032, 2994. $29.67, $29.58, $29.73, $29.66, $28.92, $29.28, $29.99, $29.97, $29.37, and $29.56.
And unlike how this suppressor performed on the 300 Blackout SBR, when I use it on this 5.56 AR-15, it actually increases the velocity of these projectiles, but just by a little bit, and the change is pretty much negligible. But it has the opposite effect with 5.56 than it did with 300 Blackout. All right, so now the next test I want to do, and the last test, is the heat retention test. Now I'm expecting the suppressor to get hot with 5.56. It's a much quicker round, and it does dispel a lot more heat and gas and unspent powder. But hopefully the suppressor will work like it did on 300 Blackout, and even though it's probably going to get a little bit hotter, it will cool off just as quick. But we have to test that out. So let's go back to the range, put a mag through this as fast as I can, see how hot I can get this, and see how it handles the heat. And as expected, the suppressor got really hot as compared to 300 Blackout, but it did dissipate that heat really quickly. And that's why I think the United States Air Force used titanium in the SR-71 Blackbird spy plane years ago, because it has this type of heat resilience. And we're seeing that same characteristic play out here in this suppressor. So what are my final thoughts on the OSS HX-QD Magnum Ti? Well, this is a great all-around suppressor. It's very durable, and I think most people that buy this are probably going to use it on multi-caliber applications like I used it on today. It has a very nice tone, especially in 300 Blackout, and even 5.56. It is pretty manageable. It is very, very light. It does not seem to change the ballistics or the velocities of any projectiles I shot through the host weapons today. It cools down really, really fast, and the flow-through design definitely does work. We don't get much gas coming back through the action of the gun. I think the only thing about the design of this can that I don't like is that it's not user serviceable, but I understand why that is the case, because it is rated for 338 Lapua, and you want everything in here to be welded for durability to make sure it doesn't blow apart when you use such a powerful caliber. So on my star system, how would I rate the OSS HX-QD Magnum Ti suppressor? Well, it's getting 5 out of 5 stars. This thing performed great. I love its size, how well it suppresses. I love its tone. It might be a little bit big for a lot of people's applications, but for me, I'm not going to go into combat or clear buildings with these rifles, so I kind of like my suppressors to have better performance than have it be smaller. But in all aspects of the way that I tested this, it performed great. And I think for pretty much all civilian applications, you can't go wrong with this design and this model. So tell me, what do you think about OSS suppressors or Huxwrx suppressors and this flow-through technology? Do you like their cans? Or are you like me when I first tried these out, thought they were kind of gimmicky, kind of like snake oil? They're not going to work. But then maybe you discovered they actually do. These have really impressed me. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And as always, thanks for watching. And if you don't care about it being non-serviceable, God